Hello, thank you for listening into our webinar or podcast that relates to performance management and compensation within employees. And this is a very interesting subject, and we have one of our experts, Jeremy Ames, here from HiveTech HR, who's going to be guiding us a little bit through how performance and compensation management impacts motivation. And Jeremy, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Ames. I'm the president and founder of HiveTech HR. We are a HR technology consultancy that helps our clients both implement and enhance their HR technology.
Neat. So a few days ago, Jeremy and I got together and we wanted to start talk about as the season of the performance management and compensation coming on board, we wanted to give companies the right tools to help guide them through this kind of difficult time of the year where there's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of changes, people are getting reviewed. Some people are maybe even being disappointed with their reviews and their compensation, and we wanted to empower our clients and our listeners with a way that they can actually go about doing this in a more healthy way, and giving them a few tools so the next year will be more helpful. So Jeremy actually did a guest blog post for us on our WeCould blog, which I highly recommend you to go and give and start subscribing to the newsletters so you can get this fresh content on a weekly basis. And he wrote basically a really amazing compilation of different tips and ideas and ideologies of performance and compensation management. And today we're kind of just digging into that a little bit more. One of the things that he had mentioned in the blog article was there was a fairly standard process of this sort of management, and it was review, rate, raise, rejoice, rinse, and repeat. And so we're going to kind of go in and dig a little bit deeper into each one. And Jeremy, if you want, maybe we can start off by just talking about the review, which is the first part and probably the kind of the starting element to this whole management process. And one of the things that you'd mentioned there was Michael Moon and the psychological impact that the employees have on this whole review process. What are your thoughts on that?
So that is correct, that the kickoff to the process is the review, the performance review essentially, and that's very consistent across companies. There are some companies that are getting away from the performance review, but overall that is still core to the process. So it's basically whether it depends on how the company actually, their process works, but usually it involves the employee and the manager doing a review of the employee and kind of coming together and deciding how the employee did over that period of time, whether it's quarterly or annually. And so the process kind of proceeds using whatever tool that company is using, whatever technology or even a paper-based review. And that's what kicks things off and then leads to that next step in the process, which is like the actual rating. Typically you end up with like a score for that employee.
Nice. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just my side, but I feel like it's almost a little bit primitive, right? Because it also just doesn't seem that fair. Once a year, a company gets together to review an employee, and there's so many aspects and dynamic of that employee. What are companies typically reviewing the employees on, and what kind of tools are they typically using in order to help them make a decision of what's the fair compensation to give them for the following year?
Yeah, I mean, there's usually a variety of different like areas that they'll review on. So things like their objectives, so the employees' objectives for what they were supposed to accomplish throughout the year. They have other things like success criteria. There's also company goals. So how did the employee do versus what the company goals would have been? And so, and there's other names from like performance factors. There's all sorts of different ways that different companies use to describe what they're trying to review an employee on. And that usually is reflected in either the form itself or as part of the process. So you review each one of those, you either get a rating or maybe answer some questions about it, and then you end up with that final product, which is, here's how I think I did, here's how you think I did, and what does that mean for my eventual score or rating.
And these forums, are they typically done with just that one-on-one manager, or is there also multiple people and components that are typically engaging with this form in this process?
Again, it varies by company, but there is the employee review, the manager review. There's also peer reviews where some of your coworkers maybe have an opportunity to give their feedback. There's something called a 360 review, which is more like a comprehensive. So there's different ways that different companies kind of decide who gets to contribute to the overall performance review.
Neat. And something that you and I were speaking about one-on-one was ongoing coaching that some companies should adapt throughout the year in order to give the employees chances to improve and set new goals and set new limits for themselves, or perhaps not new limits, new quotas. So what are your thoughts on that? Should every company be doing ongoing coaching throughout the year, or is this something that's guided by a professional, or is this something that needs to be done by their managers on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or quarterly basis?
Yeah, so there's no prescribed way that every company should do this. There's variability in terms of what type of work your typical employee is doing, potentially how they react to different scenarios. So you should know all the different ways that you can do it, but each company is going to have a different approach. Overall, coaching throughout the year is important so that you don't get to the end of the year and find out all these surprises about things that you thought you should have been doing that you didn't know about, opinions that people had that they were sharing that you had no idea. So that's what leads to a lot of the demotivation, is the lack of continuous feedback.
So you get to the end and there are all these surprises in your review about your rating, about people's opinions. So that was my point.
Neat. And who's typically in charge, is supposed to lead this? Is it the HR? Is it the managers? Who's supposed to really be the person responsible for the ongoing coaching throughout the year?
That, again, it's variable. You can have it be the direct supervisor. A lot of companies have an approach of like a mentor program. And that actually is good because it creates another level of somebody who's actually indebted and interested in the employee's career path. So that's another way that it's done, or it can be peers. Most often it is the supervisor because it's just easier to manage, like just that one-to-one relationship.
Right. All right, neat. Let's move on to rate, which is probably pretty straightforward, just giving your standard rating of an employee. Although part of it is simple by nature and then just by what it's defined as, but at the same time, it's very complex to try to start and rate a human being and how good they are and what's their contribution to the company. So, is there any kind of larger tips that you feel like companies should be emphasizing on when they're actually putting the rating together for the employees?
I mean, the first question they should ask is, do we actually need a rating scale? Because you're right, it's a huge demotivator. I mean, it's what people most often come out of that process feeling like they've been demoralized, as they've had a hit to their ego, whatever the end result is. There's a lot of potential negative impact to putting a letter on somebody's forehead. And that's what I wrote in the article. So if it's absolutely necessary, you need it to get to a compensation number, then I guess you have to do it. But could there be another way that you might actually succeed in like basically evaluating somebody's performance where it doesn't involve giving them does not meet expectation or meets expectations, or what the typical rating scale would be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of goes back into the doesn't meet expectations. I think part of that responsibility should fall on the level of the manager that should be doing ongoing coaching throughout the year, because it shouldn't be a surprise to the employee that they're not meeting expectations.
Right. I was going to say that if it is a surprise, those are the people who you end up losing as an employee. And well, like I said in the article, while there's good turnover, there's people that you clearly are not adding value to the organization. Most of the people who you end up thinking were good turnover could have been fixed or could have been resolved, whatever the right term is. And yet the cost of that turnover is huge to the organization. So that's where if you can correct things before it gets to that point, you're going to end up saving a lot of time and energy and money in the end, because that's what we're all, organizations are trying to do in the end.
Neat. And so what about the raise process? Do you think a raise is something that should be done once a year during the compensation and management process, or should it be done throughout the year, maybe even on a quarterly basis, or as they reach their goals, or as they hit their milestones? What are your thoughts on raises?
I mean, that's something that's so core to the way companies operate. And there is a lot of administrative work that goes into that process. I've worked with so many companies where they just basically, especially HR, they go into like shutdown mode where they go through this process. So increasing the frequency of that, especially at large organizations, is going to be difficult. I mean, that's just logistically true. However, there's definitely ways throughout the year that you can still incent people with things other than just pats on the back. I mean, there are rewards programs. There's a lot of like software vendors now are offering rewards programs. There's more touch points to like do just a soft thing, like send somebody a little badge or something. But then, beyond that, to actually give a gift certificate. I'm saying that you don't necessarily have to give a raise every quarter. Maybe that's something you do for people who are incented by like sales type commissions and things, but you still need some way to recognize people throughout the year in something other than just that pat on the back, like I said. That whole point of rejoice in my chain is something that we kind of we've only danced around it, but it's so important to the whole, like how much the performance and the comp leads to that motivation or demotivation. And so there's a time period after you go through this where it's just this, I call it like you're hanging in the balance. Like you're either going to be pushed through for a few more months to like really deliver and be this awesome employee, or you're just going to be like completely beat down and just like, I don't even care anymore. Like I don't care about this company. And that whole time period is huge. And companies just assume that everyone's like, yes, I got like a 5% raise or a 3% raise, and this is awesome. But that's not what happens in reality. In reality, most often there is that lull and there is that damage to the employee's, motivation that then causes a productivity hit. It causes a lot more like chatter amongst people about negative sentiments. So that time period is huge, and it's ignored by most companies.
Yeah, I read in a Forbes article a little while back, and I'll put the link on that attached to the webinar, but that the number one reason that employees leave their job is a lack of appreciation. And so I think the raise and rejoice is something that really goes hand in hand. As you're giving your employees the raise, you have to consider the fact that maybe they were expecting more, or maybe they felt like they deserved more. And then as soon as that isn't met, or whatever it is, there's kind of like, okay, well, what's going to happen next year? Am I going to be in the same seat as next year? What's going to change? And that's where the chatter starts to build up, and people start to be demotivated, as you said. So what are some kind of tips that you think would help companies rejoice? Is it your typical like in-office benefits and perks? Or are we talking about like a team outing, or kind of the badges and the little kind of gizmos that you were saying that are good to pass along to the employees? What are your recommendations on how companies can rejoice and also give them an ROI, hopefully, that will lead them to a stronger year?
I mean, I think it's more about what we've already talked about, which is that this isn't the only time of year that we care about you as an employee, right? As a team member. We care about you throughout the year. We care about your work, your performance, your successes. At my company, we try to keep a pulse on how people are feeling, and we ask them like a question a week using a particular tool, and they give the feedback on that based on how they're feeling at the time, and they give suggestions, they thank people. It's just ways of doing those kind of things that make it seem like, okay, this is just another time of year. I need to have a larger scale review. I want to know what I'm going to do over the course of the remainder, or for the next year, or quarter. But it's not the only time that my company cares about me. That way you're rejoicing constantly. You're not just rejoicing one time.
Yeah, and I also see the rejoicing and the coaching going hand in hand as well, because the relationship between the manager and the employee should not be this one time a year process, but it should be this continual relationship, just like a marriage or just like many other more intimate relationships that you have in your life. It's the idea where you're giving constantly people feedback on what you like, what you don't like, and then bringing the team together to make sure that their confidence is lifted up and that they're feeling eager to work on the things that they just got feedback from.
Yeah. And actually, something I hadn't even thought about, and these kind of conversations jog that, but rejoicing around this time of year, usually it's something like that people just whisper about, like, oh, I got an O or I got an E, and oh, I don't know why my manager said this about me. If you can maybe bring that out into the open and have some celebrations, more, team related celebrations about accomplishments and how that contributed to the overall company goals, that would be a way that you are actually rejoicing around a time of year that's celebrating performance, not just like a holiday party, but like this is a celebration of all the things that we did and we collectively did. So it's actually something I hadn't thought of, but it's not a bad idea.
One of the companies that I used to work for, they would put this like retreat in order once a year. They would take the team somewhere out of the country or somewhere nice like Costa Rica, or they went skiing one time. And basically throughout the year, there was sort of a competition, and a few people were taken from each department. And there was like a certain, amount, like I'm just making something up. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but 5 people were taken from the sales team, and 5 people were taken from the marketing department, and 2 from accounting, and 1 from whatever. And then every quarter along with that, they would also praise the people that are potentially reaching this vacation, this dream vacation. So do you think that's actually a healthy way to put the performance management in place? Or do you think as soon as you look on the screen and you see like, oh, Ashley's going to Costa Rica, but my life, I'm stuck here in my cubicle, that's kind of a deflating the idea? Or do you think at the same time it's like, oh, Ashley's there, I feel like I'm pretty close to her. If I work harder this month, maybe I can get there?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, I think celebrating team-based goals is much more productive. That way, it's not, as soon as you go individual, there's just this competition that happens that's unhealthy. And you see that all the time in sales organizations where people go down to Miami because they sold enough or they reached a quota. And it can be motivational to some people, but it also can be extremely demotivational to others, just either based on personality or based on, performance. If they don't contribute enough, they feel like they've missed out, and it's demotivating, right? So if you do it more on a team-based approach, then you can kind of join together and reach those goals, but you're not feeling like people are looking down on you if you as an individual didn't succeed.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback. Neat. And the last 2 steps of the process that you put together was rinse and repeat. So maybe you want to quickly tell us a little bit about that, and what are your thoughts on how people should, kind of put all the feedback and the rating and the reviewing away, and then repeating the process for the next year?
Well, I think it is going to be cyclical. So until companies do get to the point where it's just ongoing, there's going to be some cyclical nature to this, whether it's quarterly, annually, if they have a 90-day intro review to review incoming new employees. But what doesn't happen right now is that rinse and repeat is not combined with like a revisiting of what is the right approach we should be taking. So a lot of companies, whatever they put in place 10 years ago, 5 years ago, is just what they keep doing over and over. They just keep rinsing, repeating the same process, which has people falling out of it and becoming demotivated. So in order to increase the motivation, that should be revisited, I would say on whatever frequency you're doing it. If you're doing it quarterly, you should look and say, is this still going to work for us when we go through this process again? If you're doing it annually, same thing. And that's what's missing in companies, whether it's the technology that they're using technology that demotivates and doesn't accomplish what they want it to do, or if it's just the soft points of the process, like the meeting with the manager employee. If you revisit and look at your process every time, then you're going to be more sure that it's going to be successful for you as a company. That's my point.
Yeah, and I think another kind of like important thing to note, or to piggyback off your comment, was, HR people, they're also human, just like the employees are, and they don't know all the right answers. And so just as you guys are the companies reviewing the employees and the managers, it's important that the managers and the employees are also reviewing the feedback and the review system. And so they can put things in line and comments in line that make them feel like what's fair and what's not fair. And the most important part of that is to actually listen to what it is that they're saying and put objectives and actions that follow whatever their feedback and opinion is. Wouldn't you agree? Or maybe not.
Yeah, no, I do definitely agree. It's both about the actual listening and taking action on stuff that comes out of the review cycle. It's also about something very simple, which is compliance. Companies say that they go through it exclusively, and the ones that have to have a rating that contributes to the compensation process are more likely to go through that. But not everyone does go through it the way they should. It's not always like every single employee went through it. They went through it consistently. So that compliance is actually very important. Whether it's something that happens ongoing or if it is just that one time a year, you should be doing it.
Neat. I think it's a great way to wrap up the talk for today, unless you have any kind of last tips or things that you want to leave these HR leaders and the ones who are going to be carrying the future exits of hopefully the next companies of the decades to come. Any kind of tips or ideas that you want to leave them with before we end the call?
I mean, just essentially to revisit your own process, but also listen to the experts, listen to the people who are looking at this from both the psychology of the performance reviews, listen to the experts who are looking at it from what is actually going to be successful for organizations, and also keeping up with the technology. And if you can't, then reaching out to those who do keep up with the technology that can support kind of when you go through that revisiting process, what you want your process to look like. So that's my last point.
Neat, Jeremy. So if anybody has any questions to reach out to Jeremy, what's the best way that they can contact you? Is it through Twitter? Is it through email? You want to tell them both just so they have a way to ask you any questions or get your opinion on anything?
The best way to reach out to me, you're saying?
Yes.
You can email me at jeremy.ames@hivetechr.com. Or you can follow me on Twitter and even direct message me at the HCM guy. It's THEHCMGUI. Or yeah, those are the two best ways of reaching out to me.
Great. All right. Thanks so much for being on the call, Jeremy, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks.